Michael Jones, the Chair and CEO with Equatorial Launch Australia. Welcome to Australia in Space TV.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Wonderful to meet you. And you're probably the most prominent space company in Australia, given your successful launches last June or July up in the NT for a NASA mission. Maybe introduce us to ELA, otherwise it's better known, and your current activities, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting, just to start with, that you say, we're probably prominent or profile, where we actually play a pretty low profile game.
Got it.
We much prefer to be known as a company for our achievements rather than our predictions.
Nice.
And that sometimes I think comes back and bites us a little bit because, it appears almost every day at the moment that somebody's holding their hand up and saying, we're going to become a spaceport. The barriers to entry, are much, much higher than people think they are.
Yep.
And so a lot of those comments we don't think hold a lot of things. But the background to us and who we are and what we are is simply that the company was founded in 2015. So it's been around for a while. The original founder was a guy named Scott Wallace, and he and I knew each other sort of 30-something years ago. And he kept pestering me to join the company. So eventually in mid-2021, I agreed. Whole bunch of things needed to change, but we had the NASA contract in train. The guys had done a really good job of securing that contract, but it was pretty onerous in a number of ways, which really challenged us as a startup business. And so, cut a long story short, we've completely changed our management structure, completely changed the way that we were approaching our licensing and our business plan for the future. And all for the better, I would hope. You never know, but that's what the intention is.
And so you had the NASA contracts well before you started. Sort of, I take it you would have obviously had the company first. But what came first? But to get those contracts allowed you to build the sort of the port and the like around that.
Yeah. So the contract with NASA was signed in 2019, and one of the early employees, and who's still a significant shareholder, a guy named John Carston, who actually lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico, works at Spaceport America and part of Space Force. He secured that contract for us. So yeah, I walked into that. I didn't have anything to do with that. But, with COVID and with being a startup company that effectively was broke, the execution of that contract was a challenge. And so that's what I set about changing and putting in place. And, the new management team, so Ben Tett, who at the stage was, my right-hand man and still is, as the general manager of launch, we basically rebuilt the company almost from ground up and raised capital, got to the point where 26th of June last year, we were able to do Australia's first ever commercial space launch, and the first time that NASA has ever done a launch from a commercial spaceport, which, two significant milestones. And, the ones that people don't talk about is we did 3 launches in 15 days. And the third launch, we actually pulled a couple of days early because we were worried about the weather coming. And, I think that's a testimony to the team at ELA and the guys at NASA and the professionalism and the great working relationship we had.
Well, the other thing I note is you got your license in May and then we're launching in June. Was that just a timing thing? How close was that to potentially, from a regulatory viewpoint, was there any threat there that wasn't going to happen?
Huge amount of stress on both sides of the fence. The undertaking to get, this comprehensive launch facilities license under the new Space Act regime is not a simple exercise for either party. And, both of us were new to the game. NASA, of course, been regulating and, operating for 75 years in space, but in that creates some problem in that they were so used to doing things the NASA way that being compliant to, the Space Launch and Recoveries Act of Australia, was a challenge for them, which, resulted in a quite unusual but really good result, which was in the end, we were the applicant for the launch permits and they were issued to ELA, not to NASA. And so effectively, we then subcontracted NASA in a weird sort of structure in order to ensure compliance, because I'm not sure we would have ever got there. The other thing that people need to understand is from the day that the minister issues, launch permits and a launch facilities license, you can't launch for 30 days. It's like a cooling off preparation period.
Right.
they also appoint an independent or oversight safety officer to make sure that you're complying with whatever restrictions are in your license or your launch permit. So yeah, it was a tough process, but we were counting down from quite a long way out. But there wasn't a lot of flex, because the NASA missions, which is the whole reason why you're doing this, had a timeline in relation to the launch windows, which is why you had bizarre things like we'll launch at 10, 22 and 36 seconds, because they wanted to be in a three-dimensional location in space. So you work backwards from the trajectory and the time of flight, to get your launch time. And and there are obviously windows that provide similar, if not the perfect, replica of that scenario. So yeah, so it was a tight run thing to get it, and it was a great sigh of relief when finally you received a letter from the minister to say you're a licensed spaceport, and sort of that was the start of things for us.
Well, it's those kind of intricate details you would hope that our regulators are learning, because again, you hear a lot of noise around the Australian regulation of space, and that there's a lot of learning underway. But it's those kind of intricate details that is sometimes difficult in government to get across, right? The commercial imperative and the scientific imperative as well, really, when you think about it, to educate them. So from these 3 launches, you've now got the Arnhem Space Centre up there, which is ready to go. Kudos to your website. It's a great website. You've really gone through and explained what you've got up there. What's your capabilities now for launch? You're available for commercial launch. What's the capability that you've got in terms of that Space Centre? Is there a limitation on the size of the rockets and those kind of things?
So we have our development comes in a number of phases, and we've completed phase 1A and 1B, which really establishes the extant site that we have that did the NASA launches. We've subsequently increased that, and we're constantly working on it. So for instance, we have a draft agreement which is due to be signed any day with the Bureau of Meteorology for them to become a subtenant with an automatic balloon launch system. We're also putting in a whole range of other capability, like a full-scale hot fire test rig to allow both stage and individual engine testing for our clients. And we will also continue to use Site 1, as we call it, which has 3 launch pads. And we'll continue to use them for sounding rockets, military tests for guided weapons, and a whole range of other activities. But the big news for us is, we've already started development of phase 2. So the adjacent piece of land to us, which is about 20 times the size of the existing site, and it's an abandoned bauxite mine. Right. So we're currently having, the development of that. So there'll be 14 new pads, a fuel facility, which will be enable us to manufacture liquid oxygen on site, plus store the vast array of fuels and gases that we need for our clients. There's nothing standard in space. Every client seems to want to have a different propellant, a different oxidizer, different inert gases for ullage, a whole range of different things, of different umbilical connectors, different ways they handle their launch stool and their rocket plume. So whilst we have a standard pad design for our phase 2, which we're going through at the moment and constructing those, each company comes with a different requirement. So we are both designing sort of the Swiss Army knife, interface, so that their rocket plugs onto our pad properly. And how do we get, much larger rockets from horizontal to vertical? And that's not a simple exercise. And, we have spaceports around Australia saying, oh, we're going to launch big rockets. And they absolutely do not know what they're talking about. Some of these rockets, were never designed to be horizontal, never designed to be shipped more than from their construction facility, a kilometre along a road with a crawler. They're always going to be vertical. So I don't know how they're going to ship them to Australia. Maybe it's some sort of magical religious thing that they're going to do, but I can't see that. So we have to go through all of that with every single customer that we do. And so we've said, practically, engineering-wise and commercially, it doesn't make sense for us to launch rockets bigger than, a payload of about 3,500 kilos. So the adjustment to our license is for us to have an unlimited license to be able to do a range of launch inclinations. So our primary inclination, which gives the best and most advantageous astrophysical launch properties is an easterly launch, where you're launching into the spin of the rotation of the Earth. Gives you about a 10% benefit in payload and or fuel, and it enables you to do either an elliptical or a circular orbit about the equator. You can then also launch what we call a mid-range inclination, which is quite popular globally. So between 20 degrees of inclination below the equator through to about 40. If we go much further right, we start to impinge upon the Sunshine Coast and Brisbane, once you're about 4,000 kilometres downrange, but nevertheless, not a good look to overfly capital cities. So we limit that to 40 degrees in the right. And then there's the southerly. So we can do a polar launch with a kink. We have a number of communities at Groote Eylandt, which are due south of us. So we have to launch slightly to the east of Groote Eylandt and then do either a yaw adjustment early in the atmosphere or a planar adjustment once you're in the space and in orbit to attain polar orbits. But contrary to some of our competitors, we can do polar orbits and do them quite efficiently. And then the ones that's really interesting for us is quite a lot of customers are now asking for 110-degree retrograde orbit, which basically puts us over the western part of the Great Australian Bight. And it's a unique thing where 4,200 kilometres where we don't fly over a person or a building. So the ability to do overland launches is quite unique globally. So that's our sort of launch azimuth and what we're offering to customers. The other thing is multiple pads, very professional setup in tracking and telemetry. 2 mission control rooms, 2 launch control rooms, 1 range control room, so that we can, sequence launches, in a very high cadence. And, our plan long term, sort of by 26, 27, is to be doing close to 50 launches a year. And on schedule, we were due to do 2 launches in after NASA and before Christmas last year. Unfortunately, our customer had quite a bad mishap, so they have delayed, but we're in discussions and negotiations with them to reactivate for either a launch later this year or earlier in 24. Likewise, we had 6 other launches due for orbital launch this year. All of those have slid to the right and are now in 24. So we're a bit nervous about what was this really nice gradual increase in launch cadence. Now it's looking more like a dumper of a wave. So that's going to put us under a bit of pressure. So we're using what we're, calling this quiescent period to now get our act together. So we're building everything, getting it all ready, going through the processes and the regulatory changes that we need to do, which are not just with the space agency. We're now going to have to store more than 200,000 litres of fuel on site at any one time. So that makes us a hazardous materials site. So all the requisite and attendant safety measures that you need to put in place for that. The other thing is, we now need to track orbital launches, out a long way. So we're working on ground stations on Cape York, Vanuatu and elsewhere, and tying into global networks so that our customers can both activate and track their space vehicles, which are being disgorged from the rockets that we launch. Tying down the logistics of how do we get rockets from, Europe. So we're shipping, out of Rotterdam, Hamburg, and also out of the UK, and then out of Long Beach in California, working out exactly how we get everything onto site with us with a high degree of repetition and, accuracy of, the way we do it. So we're doing a lot of work in advance of that sort of stuff.
Amazing. You're answering questions as you were talking then, in terms of what I had in mind. I suppose it's a fascinating business. You've obviously been in business a while. How different are you finding space just generally, given all of those details? Is it from the cash flow perspective? They obviously have to pay some sort of deposit because it is so unpredictable. Does it put pressure on you in terms of these timelines getting pushed out?
Yeah, no, great question. And please interrupt if I am rambling on.
No, fascinating.
Great question. We're a bit unique in that we are low tech risk in some ways and more of an infrastructure play is the way we look at it. So the way we do our pricing with our customers is we're investing up front and then we have a long-term sort of payback. And rather than some of our competitors overseas are trying to lock customers in on a timeline basis, we do it on a number of launches basis. And we work on the fact that, a friend of mine used to use this term, and I quite like it, which is we want the situation where at the end of 4 or 5 launches, they're so happy they need to have their smile surgically removed. And so they'll never go away.
Yeah.
That's the basis on which we're working. But it is hard because, there's a large capital investment up front. And, we've raised nearly $30 million so far. And we probably, before we're finished, we'll have to spend another $60 million on the site. But that's backed up by solid, income projections. They're not customers who we don't know.
Yeah.
So your viewers may be interested that how do we work out, who our customers are? All our customers are overseas. There are 73 companies globally who are saying, and that number changes a little bit every now and then, but 73 companies who are saying we're building a rocket. We believe 24 of those are real, and we use a triple sort of index of, one is the Space Fund Index internationally. We use a company called Bryce and Euroconsult, and then we have our own criteria where we send what's called a data collector to the company, and they have to prove to us that they're real. So there's 24 to 25 who are real. We think 15 of those will launch, and we think between 11 and 12 will survive. We want to be contracted to between 6 and 7 rocket companies regularly, with them doing multiple launches. And as I said earlier, adding up to about, a mature cadence of around 50. Much more than that becomes a bit too hectic, and our break even is a lot less than that. So we'll be a good, solid, profitable business, if we're, even achieve half of our, target objective of launches. And at this stage, we're on track for that. And, I've got my fingers crossed that the big statement I made to investors and our board and employees, so we don't make these things publicly, although I'm about to do it, is that we want to be booked out by October this year. So booked out for the next 4 to 5 years. And I think that's very achievable. I don't make claims like that without some substance to it. So I think that, the large number of MOUs, none of which we've announced, and the draft contracts that we have out and negotiating and hope to have signed by sort of end of May will then create a bit of FOMO around the world. Nice. So that the guys who are dithering can do it. But what we've also seen is 2 clear characteristics in the launch market. Elon Musk has done a big favor to the industry of making, space accessible and seem easy. The problem is it's not. It's really hard. So a lot of our customers, what we're seeing is a lot of technical problems, and there's been, a number of well advertised, whether it be ABL or, Virgin Orbit or various other, Vega, etc., having failures one way or the other in relativity, sort of having a number of aborted launches and then second stage failing to fire last week. It is hard. And so this causes them to take stock, and the other guys going, well, we better not have a failure. So that's why there's a lot of delay in the industry at the moment. So I'd say there's been, over the last 18 months, there's been 18 months more delay. So almost, 2 years type delay. And then the second thing that we've noticed is that internationally, a lot of rocket companies and spaceports are getting a lot of government support. And so we call it 2 and away. So what's happening is they're getting subsidy and or direct admissions to do their first 2 launches within their vicinity. And the reason I say that is there's nowhere on mainland Europe where you can do an orbital launch. So you have to go to, the 2 organisations vying for all that business, which is Saxonvort in the Northern Shetland Islands at about 62 degrees north, and DEUCE in Norway, which is at about 72 degrees north. And those guys are both really good organisations, just have great credibility, etc. And so the European companies are going, well, we're going to do our first 2 launches at one or other of those. In the case of ESA from Germany, their first launches they're going to do from Kourou in French Guiana, because they're partially owned by Airbus. So they get access to Kness from France's launch site in French Guiana, which is the only other, regularly operable equatorial launch from ourselves. And I think, we always get asked and say, is there demand for Equatorial Launch? And the answer is yes, that this hasn't been access to it. And it's up to us to let, payload companies know that, Equatorial Launch is available and commercially competitive prices and reliable, and, that we're good at what we do. That's our job. And so far, there's still a lot of work to do in that. But this 2 in a way is also the same in the United States. All the rocket companies that we deal with in the US are getting either NASA or National Research Office or, a whole range of different, federal customers are assisting them with, their maiden launch payloads. And so they're launching out of either Vandenberg, Kodiak in Alaska, or Kennedy Space Centre. And then they're looking to fulfill, their plans under their commercial business plan, because these guys have all raised a lot of capital and need to get that return on investment. And so that's when they start talking to us of saying, can we come down to you and can we do 11 launches a year and, do all this, and then we work out the logistics and what that costs and how do we do that so that it's more attractive than continuing to launch out of Kennedy, for instance. So,
and sorry to interrupt, the infrastructure that you've got there via Darwin, I imagine, is there any support government-wise or any infrastructure that you need in terms of support locally?
We have regular challenges from Darwin to us. So like a lot of things logistically, the last mile is where the devil in the detail is. There's currently commercial operations and there's a couple who provide that, but at the moment it's way too expensive for us. And a good example is I can ship 10 40-foot containers out of Hamburg, and then 5 containers from Darwin, to us is more expensive than shipping them from Hamburg to Darwin. So we need to solve that problem. So we're in discussions with the Northern Territory government, about opening up the port at Gove, and giving us the ability, if we want to, charter our own boat on a longer term basis, so that I don't want to be a boat operator, but if that's the way I can reduce my logistics costs by 60-70%, which is what I need to do to make it long-term competitive, then we'll do that. We would like to work with the local guys and get them to do it. They're owned by Australian investment companies, but nevertheless they're Australian companies, and I prefer to support them in doing it. But at the moment, there's a fair amount of tough pricing is the word I use. I won't get more emotive than that we need to get over, and that's the only logistics challenge. Getting it stuff to Darwin, getting the biosecurity clearances done there, repacking and reloading is easy. We do bring non-fragile stuff by road, but it's about a 16-hour road trip from Darwin along a fairly horrendous road with the East Arnhem Highway to get to us. So we much prefer to do it by ship to Gove, which has a deep water port and a roll-on, roll-off. So that's sort of one of the things we need to address in the future.
And you've also got an agreement with local traditional owners as well. Maybe just talk us through that process and how much opportunity that does provide locally, just for the Northern Territory workforce and traditional owners.
Yeah, that's actually one of the great joys of this job. So our landlord is the Gumatj clan. They own, through a Section 19, effectively own the land that we're on. It's obviously held by the traditional owners and managed by the Northern Land Council under a Section 19 lease. But for all intents and purposes, the Gumatj clan are our landlord, but they're also our partners in construction. And they're really, really good. We love working with them, and whenever we have an issue of how do we do this locally, they have exceeded our expectations every time. They're great to work with. And what's interesting, I was watching the ABC Insiders, when they were talking about Gulawai Yurupingu, who's really unwell and is a national treasure in relation to native land title, but also in the reconciliation program. Anyway, he's part of the Gumatj clan, and also Jawa Yurupingu, who I believe they're brothers, is an absolutely inspirational guy who we deal with all the time. He's the chairman of the Gumatj Corporation, whereas Uruguay is part of the Northern Land Council. And I got to tell you, these guys are rock stars in every sense. And whilst they're part of the Yothu indie band culture from a family perspective, they're real rock stars. And watching the kids, react to these two gentlemen is just amazing. They're articulate, they're very clear in their vision for their people, and how we work together and the aspiration. And one of the things that Jawa does in particular is wants the kids to increase their level of attendance at school and their involvement in STEM. And so we do a lot of school tours and school engagement programs that we've worked with the teachers up there. And like I said, it's one of the real joys of the job here. And in our company video, we have this great shot of one of our traditional owner workers there with his high-vis shirt on the back of it. He's got dig once, launch twice or something.
Right.
It's very, very cool that these guys are involved, and they're great to work with. And we also use them a lot for landowner clearance, guidance and assistance in recovering components of rockets and things like that. And they are literally, and the whole range control area is, when we're launching is we almost use exclusively traditional owner engagement for that. And so that's been great. And it is truly, a great part of the job.
Well, given the issues that Darwin and Alice Springs are facing at the moment, it's those kind of sort of opportunities I think is great to hear, and keep up that wonderful work as well. I suppose the other one is you've recently, I believe it's recent, you're now at Lot 14 in Adelaide as well. Maybe the background to that particular move, you found that has been a benefit?
Yeah, the motivation for that was really simple. The space agency is based here, and in particular, the regulatory component of that. And so Chris DeLuey and his team, who have just grown and developed enormously, from a space agency perspective, has been really one of the best aspects of our development. So being effectively co-located with them was the catalyst to that. And we still have people all over the country, which is a bit of a hangover from COVID. And that'll probably continue for a while, but we're trying to aggregate everybody here, as we're working on design and development projects. But both myself and the team all rotate through the site. We do that both to keep the engagement, keep the site ticking over, and there's nothing that we can't do from up there that we need to. We've got broadband fiber optic, up there. We have backup satellite comms. We've got everything we need, including, on-site accommodation. So we do rotate through the site quite a bit, even though we're in this quiescent period, as I said, and mostly because we're overseeing development and construction on a whole range of different things, as well as, the local people that we have engaged with. But yeah, so Adelaide is effectively our corporate head office. I'm located here, but, I travel a lot. We do a lot of overseas face-to-face with our customers, as you'd imagine. And so, being co-located with the space agency is the catalyst.
And I suppose that was going to be my next question as it happens. Where can people reach out to you? I imagine, as you say, you travel a lot. We're media partners to a whole bunch of events around the world. Colorado is in a couple of weeks as well. Yeah, where could people reach out to you in person? What's your roadmap for this year?
Yeah, so, people make a lot of, highfalutin comments and statements all the time, but it is true for us. We don't have any customers in Australia, but we believe it's really important for us to be good corporate citizens. So we attend all the space events that are here in Australia. We get around a lot, and we think that that's important so that the space infrastructure and culture is developed. I think that's really important. So we have to put our money where our mouth is. So we go to those things, and so Andy Thomas, we've been to just about every time. We're actually setting up a booth for the first time and using that as a bit of a recruiting booth. But we also go to and are members of SIAA. We're members of the American Australia Chamber of Commerce. We're members of the French Chamber of Commerce. So we actually do play and try to walk the walk of being good corporate citizens as well. But my schedule, is pretty hectic. So, I last week was in Canberra, Sydney, and Melbourne. I'm in Melbourne later this week. I go to the States, to Los Angeles first week of April, San Francisco, Seattle, then Denver for Space Symposium. Back from that, then we're off to Japan, Korea, and India. Then we do Andy Thomas, we do Australian Space Connect. Then we're back in the United States for other visits, then into Europe. So it's pretty hectic schedule. We're on the go all the time, and luckily I've got a good team of executives now behind me. You know, we've got a full cadre of general managers, you know, who are responsible for the various functions that we have, and so while the boss is away, hopefully they keep everything ticking over.
Right. Well, look, we'll have obviously. Then, thank you. Obviously, I believe you're going to be in our next edition of the Australian Space magazine as well. So it's great to tell that story, and it's been a pleasure to have you on. We'll meet you at the Andy Thomas Space Forum as well, for sure. We're media partners there, and also for the Space Symposium. So look forward to meeting you in person at those events. And we'll have the links in the show notes as well. And again, kudos on your website, ela.space. We'll have the link in the show notes as well. If you want to know about the Arnhem Space Centre and everything else that they're doing there at ELA, that is the place to go. So Michael Jones, the Chair and Group CEO of the Equatorial Launch Australia, well done, and thank you very much for joining us on Australia in Space TV.
Thanks for having me. I'll see you at Andy Thomas.
Wonderful.